So I'm with Sergio Savaresi, who has just given us a very illuminating talk on the theme of RoboDriver, the enabler for the revolution of personal mobility here at ERF in Rimini. So Sergio, you rooted your ideas about the revolution in personal mobility in climate change and the climate challenge. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I think we have to, all of us should remember that as a human race, we have a big problem, which is the climate change. That probably is going to be the real big problem we will have in the next decades or the next centuries. So I think every industrial sector, and mobility is one of them, should take care of addressing that problem in the best way. Let's consider that the full mobility area is responsible for about 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's natural that the mobility system, starting from personal cars, should in some sense take care and change according to that big problem.
Okay. So, and you talked, for example, that there was no general agreement at COP28 to phase out fossil fuel, and then you moved on to some scenarios about alternative fuels and how they might be introduced, but then you drew a conclusion that in the end, hydrogen and methane were perhaps not going to be part of the solution. I mean, what were your key points there?
Okay, let's start with the climate change, and the example was the attitude in the last COP28 meeting. At this point, I think there are two different point of views. One is people or country that try to achieve the goal of staying below +2 degrees of increase of temperature, which is an ambitious goal, probably feasible, still feasible, but very ambitious. Another group is thinking that it's simply unfeasible. And their idea is that, okay, we will go on +3, +4, +5, facing massive change in the environment, potentially disaster, and we have simply to adapt and to be resilient to that change. In some sense, they say, okay, there's nothing we can do. It's impossible to achieve that goal. And that's a key point I would like to stress.
Okay.
About alternative fuels or alternative way of using energy on board. Essentially, there are two directions. One is electricity, so produce renewable electricity and then put on battery packs. That's one way. The second way is to recreate fuel, let's call it e-fuel, again from electricity and by capture CO2, and it's a different way. It's a very nice technology. The point is that it has a very low efficiency. So far, a general agreement is that for personal cars, the electrification path is the main one.
Yes. Okay, that's good. Okay. I think for me, the key insight was this idea that in our present form or model of personal mobility, it's hugely inefficient. That cars are just occupying space. They're used for such little time. It's a hugely inefficient model. And then so moving to mobility as a service enabled by electrification is going to take us to a much more efficient mode of mobility. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, the key point is exactly that one. So we developed, we are inheriting this model that was sort of invented more than 100 years ago, and was born with the idea of personal ownership. That could work many years ago, but today we are in a situation where we have a lot of cars almost unused. So it's clear that is highly inefficient, and we cannot move to 1 billion cars to 5 billion cars unused, because we have no natural resources to do that, and it's totally unsustainable. So the key point is that we have to move from an unsustainable mobility model, personal ownership mobility model, to a new one. And the new one should be to share resources. And so I think there are no, we can talk about how long does it take, if there is a quick acceptance or a long-term acceptance, but from my point of view, and it's not just my point of view, is the only way we can go towards a sustainable mobility. There are no other ways.
Okay, so I think when people think about autonomous vehicles, there's very often a focus on the technology, and clearly that's you've addressed that to a certain extent in your presentation today. But you also, very interestingly, and this was another insight for me, you addressed the challenge of public engagement as well. So you can develop the technology, but getting the public to accept this change in mobility is another challenge. Could you expand on that, please?
Yeah, exactly. So we tend to focus a lot on the technical development of this technology, but we should be aware that today probably the biggest obstacle towards the introduction of this technology is the acceptance, and is more specifically the acceptance of risk. Because of course we know that today, let's say driving a car contains some risk. So just in Italy we have 3,000 victims from accidents, typically by human errors per year. So it's intrinsically a dangerous type of activity that we do. The point is, should we expect that autonomous vehicle or robot driver technology be completely free of fault, or should we allow this technology to have some amount of, let's say, tolerance from potential, let's say, accidents or faults? This balance, which is a balance between opportunity and risk, from one side, it's a huge opportunity to shift towards autonomous mobility or robot driver, contains risk. The big challenge is to, let's say, introduce culturally the idea is that it's beneficial, it's a technology that can bring a lot of benefits, and we should accept some amount of risk to get that big benefit. Big benefit, but some amount of risk should be accepted. I think we have to work a lot into delivering this message and to, let's say, letting this message accepted by the public opinion, and then will be translated to our policymakers.
Okay, that's good. When you talk about a revolution, what is the time horizon? Is it 5 years? Is it longer? How do you see this revolution taking shape, and over what time frame?
Okay, again, I like to say that no one really know. No one really know. You can hear very different opinions about that. People can say, you can hear people say it's just here. It's just a matter of 1-2 years because we are arrived to this technology, is ready. Some people say it will never be deployed. So you can see a broad range of opinions. And this reflects that it's a technology that, from a technology point of view, we are, let me say, at 90% or 80%, which is almost done. But we know that the final 10 or 20% is the most difficult one. And the deployment will be mostly a matter of acceptance, regulations, cultural acceptance. So it can be something like 5 years in some countries. In other countries can be a matter of 20 years. So we have a broad range of situations that can happen in the future. So no one really knows. And really depends on the specific cultural and political situation.
Okay, so in this model of a future world of personal mobility, I think you acknowledge that there will still be some people who have access to a personal vehicle, a degree of personal ownership. So it's not that everyone will move to mobility as a service as such. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, we should, let's say, keep in mind that the car today contains two very different aspects. One is a functional aspect. I just want to go from A to B in any way, so in the cheapest and the safest way, full stop. And there is an emotional part of owning a car or driving a car. And so in the future, these two parts will probably be split into different objects. The first one will be satisfied by mobility as a service or robotaxi. The second one will be maintained, and probably there will be emotional cars that probably will stay of personal ownership, because there is an emotion also in having this iconic object, or at least using as a service, but in very specific situation, like on a circuit in the weekend. So the idea is that there will be an emotional part of the car industry and cars that will stay alive, because it's a need that we have, and it's embedded in the today object, which is our personal car.
Okay, just before we close this, I'd like to ask just a couple more questions. Now, one is to do with the regulatory environment. Now, what is required from the political community and from regulation in order to for this revolution in personal mobility to be realised from your point of view?
In brief, should be more brave, and I'd like to stress that the European regulation just for doing testing. I'm not talking about the deployment of autonomous car, but just testing a high level of autonomy on public roads is extremely restrictive. We just obtained in Italy an authorization of doing, let's say, an experimental activity on public road along the Mille Miglia route, but it's extremely difficult. And this situation is slowing down a lot the development of this technology, especially in Europe. So my hope or recommendation is for our policymakers to find a better balance between this risk and opportunity. But on the other side, I understand that they just simply reflect the general feeling of people. So we have to start telling people and showing people that this technology is very useful, very positive for them, and safe. And after them, this feeling will be transferred to the policymaker. That's the only way.
Okay. So finally, you referred to a number of flagship projects that captured your interest. Could you just give us an outline of a couple of those which were of particular interest to you?
Yeah, I've been talking about the first autonomous motorsport competition, which is the India Autonomous Challenge. It was a very interesting experience. It was really a first in the history of motorsport. And we learned a lot. We learned a lot because in a short amount of time, in this protected environment, you can push these cars at the very limit of their performance. And it's a sort of acceleration of the learning curve, because you can play in a domain that you cannot explore on normal roads. So it was very instructive, not only exciting from the young engineer of the team point of view, but also accelerate a lot our know-how on how to manage situations in those extreme environments. Just think that at that speed, a car makes 100 meters per second. So the capability of the car to make decisions, to perceive the environment, and to react should be extremely fast. And when you slow down to normal speed, everything becomes a bit easier. The second one is the project we named Mille Miglia Autonomous Drive. It has been designed along the historical famous Mille Miglia race. It's an historical race in Italy. Again, we use it as a reference path because there is a big variety of situations. So we were looking for a huge variety of different situations, and we found this path as a very iconic and nice way to explore this variety of situations. And so we obtained permission to do part of this path in autonomous. Of course, an interesting part of the story of this flagship project is that we have been able to communicate a lot, to engage the public, and so we obtain both objectives: to develop the technology in practice on public road, and at the same time to attract attention and to communicate that this technology is coming, it's important, it's useful, and so on.
Okay, that's excellent. Well, that was a completely insightful presentation that you gave and a great interview. So, Sergio Savaresi, thank you very much.
Thank you.